Really glad y'all made it out. What I'd like to do is I'd like to spend just a couple minutes, just real general discussion on wheat development. And then from there, I'd like to actually walk through a few plots. And the fun part about that is as we go through the plots, you get to grab some samples along the way. And we'll eventually work our way maybe back to this table, cut a few things open, do a few measurements, look at a few other things that way in that process. But obviously we were hoping to be, I think when we initially put this date on the calendar, we were hoping to be just right before heading, so we could tell you all the things we needed to do as we got into the heading phase. And we missed that by a little bit this year. And so anybody that's walked a wheat field knows that our wheat's just a little bit ahead of where it was. And we had that warm spell back in February, and everybody kind of guessed that would happen. And then we had the freeze, and everybody thought we weren't going to have anything to look at, which reminds me, later on we'll tackle freeze in the wheat guide. Did y'all get a wheat guide? Everybody get a wheat guide? Okay, we'll get to that page later, and we'll do something with that page. And then, lo and behold, most of the wheat made it through the freeze okay. Some damage here and there, but everything tended to head out a little bit earlier, and we're seeing that all around the state. That's showing up in our USDA stats and things of that nature. And so what happens is when you finally see a joint that shows up, these are the various nodes on the plant. And as you can tell, you go from one node to the next, these inner nodes, the length in between, get longer and longer as we go. And as this node starts to push up above ground, and once this little node right here got about halfway in its elongation process, the next node started to telescope out as well. And this one finished up, and this started telescoping out, and it got about halfway, and then the next one came out. And so each of these we refer to as our inner nodes, and we'll discuss that a little more detail. And then this final node up until the head is the peduncle. And we'll measure that some as well. There's some discussion about the length of that. This one's by far the longest of any of these from node to any other point on the leaf or on the wheat, but that's our longest, if you want to call it an inner node, we call it a peduncle. That's the longest one of the bunch, so it really stretches out at that point. The length of that largely is determined by the temperature, the weather that we've got during that time frame. So the head emerges. Here's the flag leaf. You're down in this, when the head was down in here, it was in the boot stage. The head starts to emerge out, and this one I happen to grab one where none of the anthers are showing. Let me grab this one right here. And so usually when it starts to pollinate, you'll start to see a few anthers show up around the middle of the head first, not always, and then from there it works its way down and up. And after, 3-4 days after the head emerges, that's when you start to see a few anthers taking place, and that's your flowering process in this. Over about a 5, maybe 7 day period, you'll see the flowering take place across the entire head. And now I grabbed all of these from 2 plants that were side by side, and you can see they're not all exactly flowering at exactly the same time. But back to Carl's point on trying to time this out for fungicide, these are certainly right past the window on that scab timing. As soon as you start to see a few anthers show up, that's your ideal timing in a perfect world to get out there and get this sprayed. So these are a little bit past, but obviously you've got some that are like this out there as well. So you want to see about half the field with some anthers exposed if you're going to time it. And the most recent article he wrote that's on the Grain Crops Update and in the Kentucky Pest News tells us that even if you're 6 days late, you're still in good shape, and you're actually a little bit better to be late than you are to be early if you're trying to time fungicide on this. So that's the good news. So the bad news is, hey guys and gals, this wheat's early this year. That corn planting you're doing and field prep you're doing for soybeans, put it on hold and get this sprayed. The good news is you do have a little bit of a window, but it's not much in there. You couple that with the weather we've had this spring. Our forecast doesn't look good for a couple of days, and then it opens back up again, and we've had a lot of start and stop to our planting this season. So this compounds it when we're trying to manage all 3 crops as we go through. I think the farmers feel that. I know from a research point we feel that. One of our biggest concerns right now is that we're not causing sidewall compaction in our research plots, where we want to look at other things besides compaction, and hoping that we're not guilty of the same sins of trying to get into the field too early. All right, that was a real quick rundown on wheat going into the flowering and development stage. And a lot of what you're going to see is wheat that looks like this. Obviously, there's a table about wheat response and sensitivity to cold weather, and we got cold enough that all of our wheat should have been damaged according to the book, or the data out there about it. But what we learned this year, and in some other years as well, is that wheat doesn't read the book, and so I think we've been, in this case, pleasantly surprised by how the wheat crop has done. It's certainly taught us that we don't want to jump to any really quick conclusions after a freeze event, that our best thing to do is, if we've got time, to give it time to see how the crop comes through. I'll say it this way, I'm not going to breathe easy until we actually harvest the crop, because in the back of my mind I know how cold it got, and I keep thinking there's got to be something that comes of that hurts us from this. And we had some fields that were obviously were damaged, and we were able to identify those and walk on, but had a lot of other fields that look more like this in what we're dealing with. So I don't know that I'll fully be comfortable until we actually get it harvested and see what we've got, but those are good questions. Other questions. She's got a row that was planted here in November, and then an identical row that was planted in October. And so if you look side to side of these, you're looking at the same varieties and the same treatment. And so starting out, what she's got repeated throughout here is no fall fertilizer, and then some with fall fertilizer and some different spring applications, and then different seeding rates. And so part of what we're going to do, if this works out, I'd like to have one or two people grab a few samples out of this plot and a few samples out of this plot, and we'll kind of work our way through, and then by the time we get back to the table, everybody's got something out of a plot. Ken, if you want to, grab several out of this one, and somebody grab a sample out of this one. Now these are all the low seeding rate, ideally. These are all the 20 seeds per square foot, what they're supposed to be. All right, so you're just gonna go down here right about where you cut, and you're just gonna measure right there on that inner node. Now, one exception, if you happen to cut along a node, if it happened to be the node, pick a different plant and pull that off of, and just give us, you don't want to pinch it, but you want to get right on there and measure that out. And so, so that one is, let's call it 2.5 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters on that one, right at 25 inches on that.
And you said you measure all the way down, not to this node.
Not all the way down, all the way down. So in your mind, if we've got 20 plants per square foot and we've got 50 plants per square foot in terms of a target seeding rate, which one should have a smaller diameter? The 50, okay. Which one might be taller? The 50, and we're thinking that because you got more plants out there, more competition and such, okay. All right, now what we didn't do, we didn't set this up, we can't do tiller count. We can do that later, but we didn't do that part. And the peduncle is, your guess is as good as mine on that. The question there would be whether or not the fall in or the splits on the springs would change that length at all. And that might be some of the guessing we've got going on there. So what I'm gonna try to do, I'm gonna try to read off these numbers, and I'm gonna try to go, I just wrote them down as you gave them to me, but I'm gonna try to go in some sort of an order here. So let me start with the October planting, and we'll do 20 seeds, 0 fall in, and a split timing. And we had 25 inches in total height, 8.5 on the peduncle, and really 2.54 millimeter on the diameter. So 25, 8.5, and 2.54. Now let's skip to, tell you what, let's skip up to the 50. 50 seeds per square foot, 0 in and split. So it's the same nitrogen regimen, but 50 instead of 20. Okay, and so for 20, we had 25, 8.5, and 2.54. For 50, we had 25.5. We had 6 on the peduncle. We had 3.08. So on those two plants, the 50 was actually a little bit bigger on diameter than the 20, just on the two that we happened to pull. Now, obviously, we're not doing something right, and that is you'd want to pull several plants in a plot, right? You'd want to try to get several tillers involved and such. This is just more for demo. Okay, so but would you both agree, would you all agree that there's not a whole lot of difference in measurements on those two from those two different seeding rates. So let's go down to what Austin had. Austin had 35 seeds per square foot, so that's our ideal target seeding rate. Had 30 pounds of N in the fall and split in the spring. That would be pretty close to our standard recommendation and what we'd suggest. Oh shoot, yours is October though. Yeah, it's October. Yeah, so we're good. All right. So the other ones were at 25. His was 23.5, so a little bit shorter in the ones that he measured. 6.25 on the peduncle, so kind of split the difference of the other two. And 3.03, so about the same diameter as what Don measured at the high population. Still not a huge amount of difference overall in that regard. Just some others in here. Let's see. We only had one that gave us 35 seeds per square foot for the October. Skip over to some of the later planting. So Tommy had one at 20, 0 in the fall, split in the spring. The November planting, 15.75 inches in height, bigger diameter, 3.43 millimeter in diameter. So that was a bigger diameter overall. And Brad had, no, Brad was in the fall, October. Nathan had another November, 20 and 30 and split. So this one had 30, so the last one had 0 pounds of N in the fall. This one had 30 pounds, 14 inches, as opposed to 15.75, but a bigger diameter, 3.15, no, smaller diameter, 3.15 compared to 3.43. So if you just looked at those two, you'd say the fall N gave us a little bit bigger plant than having none at all. And so anyhow, gives you some idea of what we're trying to take measurements on. Now, what product out there that we currently have on the market, what product would we really want to do these kind of measurements on? What's the one product that's being marketed right now where measuring stem height and peduncle and diameter would make some sense? The Palisade. Palisade is where it would really make some sense to do those measurements on. But we'll do a couple stand counts to see how many tillers did we get with viable heads on them in that process. But before we do, I'm going to grab this sample right here. Somebody asked, well, how do you know if you've got viable pollination taking place? And this is one, y'all can do this too fairly easy. You can pull these heads out at this point. You don't need a pocket knife, which is good, typically. And you can look down in here, if you do it careful enough, you can look down in here and see the little embryos and see whether or not the ovaries, and see whether or not they've been fertilized in this process. Careful as you pull these back. Now there's a little one right there. Okay, can you all see that? This might be a spot to bring the hand lens out. Do you see that right in there? You see that right there? That's the little ovary that's trying to get fertilized, and there's the receptor to it. And you had stamens in here that were trying to pollinate as well, and so actually that brown's good. That's actually a stamen that's finished out in its pollination process. And so if this thing fertilized, it's done it within the last day or so. It's still a little bit hard to tell on this one what we've got. If I'm real careful with this, I might be able to pull this on out. There we go. That's a little bitty one. Okay, do you see, if I roll that over, come on, roll over for me. You can't teach a new wheat old tricks. Shoot, yeah. There it is. I need tweezers. And the wind to quit stopping.
The line going straight down the middle?
Yeah, there's a line straight down the middle. If you flip it over on one side, you can see a line going down the middle, and that line is dark green. That's a good sign. Okay. That tells you you've got some viability left in there yet.
There you go.
It's not, yeah, look at that. look at, zoom in on that one. That's a good one right there. That's a little further,
bigger, yeah.
A little bigger along, a little further developed. That's a really good symptom right there. That tells you that it's at least healthy, most likely is fertilized. You know, the easy answer is give it a week, we'll know for certain. But that's a real good indicator that you're asking about the viability of it. that's a good indicator that the viability is in good shape, and it most likely did fertilize in the process. So
if you look at something like that, look how much smaller it is.
yeah, that's real small, but you see how
still
developed
at
your receptor is on that one?
Yeah.
So it's still right at the pollination stage. It is maybe even today
Still happening.
been pollinated at that point. The bigger, plumper ones are easier to look at, but they're actually, if you can bite into it, it's a little bit sweet right now. Now it's not like candy cane sweet, anything like that. It's got some structure to it, some plumpness. So if we want to measure 1 square foot, how many linear feet do we need to have to get 1 square foot in 7.5 inch rows? Who knows that just off the top of their head? Okay. Well, I don't know it off the top of my head either typically. So I think it's 19.2, but we will go back in here to the guide because thankfully we have that written down. Oh, do you have your Sharpie?
Just for you.
Okay.
Page 17.
Page 7. Does everybody have their guide? No? In the truck. Okay. If you look at page 18, there's good information on page 18, so we'll discuss that first. So page 18, table 3.5, has row widths and the row length you need for 1 square foot. And in a 7.5 inch row, it's 19.2 inches. If you're close to 19 inches, we're in pretty good shape when we do the counts, okay? 19.2. Now the one right next to it tells you what kind of stand you need and relative yield you can expect from it. And wheat is very, very plastic in its overall final stand and yield response. And that means it has a lot of flexibility in terms of, they talk about in corn flex hybrids and fixed hybrids and all that kind of stuff all the time. But in wheat really is flex. It really does have a good flexibility. And so we can handle a pretty low population, still have decent yields. Now back onto this page. So this is page 17. When you get back to your truck, Eric, everybody else, you at page 17, there's a table right here that tells you the different stages of growth and the relative sensitivity to cold weather, okay? This is important. I want you to all follow along very closely. When you get back to your truck and look at this table, get a Sharpie and do that to it, okay? Because the last couple of times we've had a freeze event, none of the wheat has paid attention to this table. And so I really think next time we do a redo on this, that'll come out. Because our wheat's not responding to it. On the one hand, thankfully, it's not, right? On the other hand, that's frustrating when you have a guide like that and you think it's gonna help. Edwin said, well, what are we gonna do to replace it? And I said, for now, a question mark goes in that spot, because right now I don't think anybody has any good data to tell us what will and won't survive and what factors are behind it, other than just simply going out and scouting. That was my other part of the comments, maybe a question mark and need to scout, and that's about it right there. Okay. So we still got about 10 minutes, is that right? I think our best thing to do then is what we'll do is we'll go to each of the 3 populations. We'll pick a 0 in the fall, and we'll do the 30 pounds in the spring and see whether or not we have any differences in our stand counts, okay? So 19.2, basically put that about somewhere in there. And then, folks, you all may have different methods on this, but exactly kind of pull that wheat back. I'll basically start it like that, and then I'll start to pull them away. Now, at this point in time, you're looking for heads that have about 30, 35 spikelets on it. That's all we're counting. We're not interested in tillers that don't have heads at this point. Earlier in the season, we're counting every tiller out there. And this is one thing, somebody asked a question yesterday on this, and it was a good question. In the book, when we talk about population, we just count the main stem as a tiller for the population purposes, because we're not going to ask you to dig down in there and figure out which one is the main stem and which ones are tillers, okay? So when we're talking about head counts or tiller counts, for that purpose right there, a tiller and the main head are the same thing. Everybody good on that? Now, if we're talking about growth and development and things like that, that's when we separate out and differentiate between the main stem and the tillers that come off, okay? All right, so who's good at counting? So there's actually,
Oh.
I would count these top two. I don't know if I count that bottom one as I'm doing it. I'm asking, anybody else have a different opinion? That bottom one's pretty small. It's not quite the 30 by the eyeball test. Anybody disagree? Now's the time to do it. What does they say before a wedding? Speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. All right, so there's two. These two are out. There's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Again, this one down here is so low, I won't count it. There's 12 that popped loose on me. 13, 58, 59. I'm right about 60, maybe 61 in there.
At the end there,
And you all count,
Split application.
and that's a split in application. You all counted this one.
60.
So this was 60 as well. So the same number of heads per square foot. Okay.
With the only difference being single in application.
Yours was a single in application where mine was split. But in terms of number of heads in that area, they're basically the same. Okay.
But we thought fewer small tillers.
Fewer small tillers. Okay. Interesting. Austin or Brad? Yeah.
So we had the same one that you had, only a higher population for 35.
So you had the same nitrogen regimen that I had,
Yeah.
but at 35
Right.
seeds per square foot. Okay.
And so we had 59 heads.
59.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really close to 60.
I had 56 on a single app.
You had a 56 on a single app. Okay.
At 42.
35.
At 35 as well. Okay.
42.
42. And you're at which? You had 42. So you had 30 pounds of in the fall, but the low population, you had 42 heads.
That doesn't make sense.
Y'all follow that? Uh-uh.
You said it is variable.
It is variable. No, I'm not, and I'm not arguing you're counting either. So that one had fall in and actually has a lower head count than these two here.
I ran our fingers with those.
Yeah, okay. Austin, you told me yours a little bit ago.
58, 59.
58, 59, and yours was in the high population, right, Austin?
One down. I was 30 pounds in the fall, single spring.
30 pound, okay.
And that was for the low crop.
Oh, for the low, so okay. Did anybody go all the way down to 50 and count it? Nobody wanted to.
No one wanted that.
That's okay. We don't, I think we're up against the clock on time, so that's all right. But you did see in here, to Nathan's point, yes, this stuff is variable. And these are the type of measurements, if you're out scouting trying to get an idea about counts and such, these are some of the things you're trying to do. A couple of you measured spikelets. How many spikelets did you get on yours?
16.
15 to 16? 15, okay. And we say in here, I'm gonna read it off just to make sure I'm saying it right. We want 16 to 18 spikelets per head, ideally. So we may be just a little bit short on that, barely. You had 19 on yours, okay.
In what in?
20, 30 fall split spring.
Okay,
Some more in.
so he got just a little bit fewer more heads, or spikelets on his head, on the heads overall. You're hoping to get about 35 or so seeds per head when it's all said and done. There's more than that there's more potential spots than that on a head. That's what you're hoping to get for overall. Ideally, you'd like to get 60 to 70 heads per square foot for maximum yield, is what we say on a population standpoint. You can go down to about 55 and you're still gonna have adequate yield. And on the flip side, if you're up around 90 to 100, well then you've got a pretty good odds of it all falling over on you, lodging on you. So that 60 to 70 is kind of the nice sweet spot. And what we found in this demo is at least this low population we got there this year with it. I think the issue with seeding this low, there's two ways to look at that. Yes, you can get a good population and adequate stand and even adequate yields at the low population. There are going to be some years though where you don't get, if you drop 20 seeds, viable seeds per square foot, you may not get all 20 to germinate on you and may not have a high enough stand in those years to help you out. But we do have a lot of flexibility, and so if we're talking plants per square foot, you know, we can be down as low as 24 plants per square foot and still assume we're going to have a max yield. And if we're down around that 18 to 21, we're still at 90 to 95% yield. So while this is a much, much lower seeding rate, if you get all of the plants to germinate and survive and all produce viable heads, you've got a chance to have close to maximum yields with this population. Hopefully we have some good weather and have a nice weather during harvest season and see what we can make out of this. Okay. Folks, I appreciate it. Y'all were a good group. I enjoyed it, and I'll cut you loose. So, thank you.